Cattle baron hires fake bride, but she's undercover journalist, investigating him for land fraud conspiracy. What happens when a powerful cattle baron hires a woman to pretend to be his mail-order bride to stop his mother's matchmaking? But the woman who shows up is actually an undercover journalist investigating him for massive land fraud. When fake marriage meets real danger in 1880s Colorado, no one is prepared for what comes next. Hit that like button and subscribe for this explosive tale of deception, justice, and unexpected love. Alexander Thornton stood at the window of his Denver office watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom he'd conquered. At 35, he owned more land than some European princes, controlled cattle herds that could feed entire cities, and had enough money to buy whatever or whoever he wanted, which made his current predicament all the more irritating. "Your mother's arrived," his assistant Frederick announced from the doorway, "with another young lady." Alexander suppressed a groan. This would be the seventh potential bride his mother had imported from the East in the past 6 months, each one more desperate than the one to become Mrs. Alexander Thornton, with access to his fortune and status. "Send them away. Tell them I'm in a meeting." "Sir, with respect, that excuse is wearing thin. Your mother is persistent." Persistent was a kind word for Eleanor Thornton. Relentless was more accurate. She'd moved to Denver 6 months ago with the express purpose of seeing her son married, and she attacked the project with the same ruthlessness that had built the Thornton empire. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His mother swept in without waiting for permission, trailing a young woman who looked like she'd been ordered from a catalog, blonde, pretty vapid. "Alexander, darling, I'd like you to meet Miss Constance Wilmington. She's from a very good Baltimore family." Alexander barely glanced at the girl. "Mother, I've told you repeatedly that you're too busy for marriage." "Yes, darling, you've mentioned it several dozen times." Eleanor's smile could have cut glass. "Which is why I've taken the liberty of accepting the Vanderbilts' invitation on your behalf. Their ball is next month, and you'll need a companion." "I'm not going to the Vanderbilts' ball." "Of course you are. It would be rude to decline now." Eleanor turned to the trembling Miss Wilmington. "Constance plays the piano beautifully." "Don't you, Wire?" The girl simpered something Alexander didn't bother to hear. His mind was already working on a solution. His mother wouldn't stop until he was married. But what if he was already engaged, or better yet married? "Mother, Miss Wilmington, if you'll excuse me, I have urgent business to attend to." After they left, Alexander called for Frederick. "I need you to place an advertisement. For more cattle buyers. For a wife. Or rather, someone to play my wife." Frederick's usually impassive face showed surprise. "Sir, a business arrangement. Someone to pretend to be my mail-order bride for 6 months. Long enough for my mother to give up and return to Boston. I'll pay handsomely." "Mr. Thornton, that seems efficient. Place the ad in the Chicago and New York papers. Be discreet. I want someone intelligent enough to play the part convincingly, but not someone who'll get ideas about making it permanent." 2 weeks later, Alexander reviewed the responses. Most were obviously unsuitable. Too eager, too desperate, or too clearly after his money permanently. But one letter stood out. "Victoria Hamilton," he read aloud. 28, educated at Vassar, speaks 3 languages. Currently employed as a governess, but seeking a change in circumstances. The photograph showed an attractive woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes. But it was her postscript that sealed his decision. "I understand this is a business arrangement and have no interest in anything beyond the agreed-upon terms." "Perfect, Itom." A woman who understood boundaries. They corresponded, briefly establishing terms. $5,000 for 6 months of marriage, then a quiet divorce citing irreconcilable differences. She would arrive in 2 weeks, they would marry immediately, and she would play the devoted wife until his mother retreated. The day of Victoria's arrival, Alexander waited at Union Station with Frederick. He'd prepared everything. A story about their correspondence, a modest ring to make it believable, even a house separate from his mansion where they could maintain appearances while keeping appropriate distance. The train pulled in with its usual fanfare of steam and whistles. Alexander watched the passengers disembark looking for Victoria Hamilton. Then he saw her. She was more striking in person than in her photograph. The dark hair was pinned in an elaborate style that suggested sophistication. She wore a traveling dress of deep green that emphasized her figure without being inappropriate. But it was her eyes that caught him. sharp, assessing, taking in everything around her with an intensity that seemed almost predatory. Mr. Thornton, her voice was cultured with a hint of something he couldn't place. Miss Hamilton, welcome to Denver. She smiled, and something about it made him uneasy. It's quite different from what I expected. Bigger, more civilized. We're not all cowboys and saloons despite what the Eastern papers print. No, I can see that. You've built quite an empire here from what I've read. The way she said it, like she knew more than she should, sent a warning through him. But he dismissed it. Of course she'd researched him. Any smart woman would. They married that afternoon in a civil ceremony with Frederick and his wife as witnesses. Victoria played her part perfectly. Demure but not simpering, affectionate but not overwhelming. When the judge pronounced them married, she lifted her face for the obligatory kiss, and Alexander found himself lingering longer than necessary, caught by the scent of her perfume and the softness of her lips. Well, she said softly as they parted. That was more pleasant than expected. The house he'd prepared for her was respectable, but not ostentatious. A 3-story Victorian in a good neighborhood, far enough from his mansion to maintain privacy, but close enough to visit daily for appearances. This is lovely, Victoria said, exploring the rooms. Though I assume we won't actually be living as husband and wife. Correct, I have my own residence. I'll visit daily for appearances, escort you to necessary social functions. But otherwise you are free to do as you please. And your mother? We'll be told we had a whirlwind courtship through letters and decided not to wait. She'll be suspicious, but can't prove otherwise. Victoria unpinned her hat, setting it carefully on a table. Tell me about your business, Alexander. I should know details if I'm to be convincing. It was a reasonable request. Over dinner, he explained the broad strokes of his empire, the cattle ranches, the railroad investments, the mining interests. Victoria listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood business better than most men he knew. You're quite knowledgeable about commerce, he observed. My father was in business before he died. I helped with him his books. She paused, sipping her wine. I've heard there's been some controversy about land acquisitions in Colorado. Something about disputed claims. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. Business is always controversial when you're successful. Lesser men resent those who achieve what they cannot. Of course, I didn't mean to imply anything improper. But her eyes said differently, and again Alexander felt that unease. There was something about Victoria Hamilton that didn't quite fit. That evening after Alexander left, Victoria locked the door and went to her trunk. From a false bottom, she pulled out notebooks, newspaper clippings, and documents. Her real name wasn't Victoria Hamilton. It was Catherine Wells, investigative journalist for the New York Tribune. For 3 years, she'd been tracking stories of land fraud in the West. Powerful men using forged documents, intimidation, and sometimes murder to steal land from homesteaders and smaller ranchers. Alexander Thornton's name appeared in too many of these stories to be coincidence. His advertisement for a temporary wife had been the perfect opportunity. 6 months of close access to one of the most powerful men in Colorado, chances to search his office, overhear his meetings. Her editor had jumped at the idea despite the risks. Fine proof, he'd said. Thornton's too smart to leave obvious evidence, but everyone makes mistakes. Find his. Now she was here, married to her target, playing a role that was already more complicated than expected. Alexander Thornton wasn't what she'd imagined. She'd expected arrogance, cruelty, obvious villainy. Instead, he was intelligent, cultured, and surprisingly respectful. It didn't mean he wasn't guilty, but it meant she'd have to be more careful. The next morning, Alexander arrived early with his mother in tow. Eleanor Thornton swept into the house like an invading army, examining everything with critical eyes. So, Eleanor said, studying Catherine with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen, "You're the woman who finally caught my son's attention." "It seems so," Catherine replied, playing the nervous new bride perfectly. Through letters, Alexander says, how modern. The skepticism was obvious. Sometimes the heart finds its match in unexpected ways, Catherine said, linking her arm through Alexander's. She felt him tense, then relax into the role. Indeed, tell me about your family, Mrs. Thornton. Catherine recited the story they'd agreed upon, orphaned, young, educated through the charity of a wealthy aunt, working as a governess until loneliness drove her to answer Alexander's advertisement. How convenient that you have no family to meet, Eleanor observed. Mother, Alexander warned. I'm simply making conversation, darling. Eleanor's smile was sharp. You must forgive a mother's protectiveness, Victoria. Alexander is quite a catch. I'm sure you're aware of his assets. I'm aware that he's a good man who offered me a new life, Catherine said firmly. If I'd wanted only money, Mrs. Thornton, there were easier ways to obtain it than traveling across the country to marry a stranger. Eleanor looked surprised, then something like approval flickered in her eyes. Well, you have spine at least, that's something. After Eleanor left, Alexander turned to Catherine. That was well done. I've dealt with difficult women before. She'll be watching us closely. We'll need to be convincing. Then we should be seen together. In public. Often. Alexander agreed, and thus began their elaborate charade. They attended the opera, where Catherine's genuine knowledge of music impressed Denver's elite. They dined at the best restaurants, where Alexander found himself enjoying her conversation more than he'd anticipated. They rode through the city parks, Catherine handling her horse with skill that surprised him. You're full of surprises, Mrs. Thornton, he said one afternoon as they rode. As are you. You're not what I expected from a cattle baron. What did you expect? Someone rougher, less sophisticated. I wasn't always sophisticated. Money has a way of polishing rough edges. Tell me about before the money, Catherine prompted, genuinely curious. Alexander was quiet for a moment. My father was a small rancher. Honest, hard-working, but not business-minded. He was cheated, lost everything. Died broken. I swore I'd never be weak like him. Being honest isn't weakness. Isn't it honest men die poor, Victoria? Smart men die rich. And which are you? Which do you think? Catherine studied his profile, seeing something darker beneath the polished surface. I think you're more complicated than either. That evening there was a reception at the governor's mansion. Catherine wore a gown of midnight blue that Alexander had sent over, playing the part of the devoted new bride. But she was also listening, watching, gathering information. She overheard Alexander talking with Judge Patterson about a land dispute. The paperwork is clear, the judge was saying. The Henderson claim is invalid. See that it stays that way. Alexander replied, his tone carrying subtle menace. Later, she heard him discussing cattle prices with a railroad executive, mentions of preferential rates that bordered on illegal. Each conversation added pieces to the puzzle she was building. You're very observant, Alexander said, appearing at her elbow. Catherine's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm. I'm trying to learn about your world, to be a proper wife. And what have you learned? That power in Denver flows through you like water through a river. Everyone wants something from you, including you. I have what I wanted, a new life, a fresh start. Alexander studied her, and Catherine felt like he was trying to see through her skin to the secrets beneath. Sometimes I wonder if you are too good to be true, Victoria. Everyone has secrets, Alexander, even you. Especially me. He offered his arm. Dance with me. Give the gossips something to discuss. As they waltzed, Catherine was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, the strength in his arms, the way he moved with surprising grace. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, an investigation. But her body was responding to his proximity in ways that had nothing to do with journalism. You dance well, she said to distract herself. My mother insisted on lessons, said no son of hers would be a social embarrassment. She loves you. She loves the idea of me, the successful son, the empire builder. I'm not sure she'd love who I really am. And who are you really? Alexander's gray eyes met hers. Someone you should probably stay away from. The warning should have made Catherine more cautious. Instead, it intrigued her. Over the next weeks, she pushed boundaries, visiting his office unexpectedly, with lunch, attending business dinners, where wives weren't usually welcome, asking questions that danced along the edge of dangerous. Your wife is very interested in your business, Frederick observed one day when Catherine had just left the office. Too interested, Alexander asked. Perhaps. She asks unusual questions for a former governess. Alexander had noticed too. Victoria's understanding of contracts, land rights, and financial matters went far beyond what her supposed background would provide. But when he tested her with false information, she hadn't taken the bait, hadn't revealed any agenda beyond curiosity. Still, he had Frederick investigate her background. The report came back clean. Victoria Hamilton had indeed been a governess. In New York had attended Vassar, had no criminal record or suspicious connections. What Frederick's investigation didn't uncover was that Victoria Hamilton was a real person who died of pneumonia 2 years earlier, and Catherine had assumed her identity. Meanwhile, Catherine was getting closer to the truth. She'd managed to glimpse documents in Alexander's office that showed a pattern of land acquisitions just before railroad announcements suggesting inside information. She'd overheard a conversation about removing obstacles that sounded ominous, but she needed concrete proof, something that would stand up in court. The opportunity came during a party at Alexander's mansion. While the guests mingled, Catherine slipped away to his private study. The door was locked, but she'd learned to pick locks years ago while investigating a story about child labor in factories. Inside, she found files that made her blood run cold. Not just land fraud, but documentation of bribes, intimidation, and in 3 cases what looked like orders for violence against homesteaders who wouldn't sell. The smoking gun was a ledger detailing payments to judges, senators, and even a federal marshal. She was photographing the documents with a small camera she'd hidden in her reticule when she heard footsteps. Quickly, she put everything back, but there was no time to leave. The door opened and Alexander walked in. For a moment, they stared at each other. Catherine's mind raced for an explanation. "I was looking for you," she said, injecting a note of hurt into her voice. "Miss Wilmington cornered me, said some rather cruel things about our marriage. I needed a moment alone." Alexander closed the door behind him. "My study door was locked." "Was it?" "It opened when I tried the handle." The lie came smoothly, but her heart was pounding. He moved closer, and Catherine realized how dangerous this man could be. She'd seen the documents, knew what he was capable of. Yet when he reached out to touch her face, his hand was gentle. "You're crying," he observed, and Catherine realized tears had indeed formed, from fear, not hurt. "She said I was obviously after your money, that everyone knew it was a business arrangement." "Isn't it?" Catherine looked up at him, making a decision that would change everything. "It was supposed to be." Alexander went very still. "And now I find myself thinking about you when you're not here, watching for your arrival, missing you when you leave." The words were meant to deflect suspicion, but Catherine was disturbed to find truth in them. "Victoria," Alexander's voice was rough, "this isn't what we agreed to." "I know." She stepped closer, playing a dangerous game. "But agreements can change." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like their wedding kiss. This was passionate, demanding, dangerous. Catherine kissed him back, telling herself it was for the mission to maintain her cover. But when his hands tangled in her hair and he pressed her against the desk, she forgot about journalism, about investigation, about everything except the fire racing through her veins. "Alexander," she gasped when they broke apart. "Tell me to stop," he said against her neck. "Tell me this is a bad idea." She should have. Instead, she pulled his mouth back to hers. They were interrupted by Frederick knocking. "Mr. Thornton, the governor is asking for you." Alexander pulled away, both of them breathing hard. "We should return to the party." "Yes." But neither moved for a moment, staring at each other with a mixture of desire and confusion. "This changes things," Alexander said finally. "Everything." Catherine agreed, though they meant different things entirely. After the party, Alexander didn't go to his own mansion. He followed Catherine to the house he'd provided and for the first time stayed the night. They made love with a passion that surprised them both, as if they were trying to burn through the lies between them with physical truth. Afterward, as Catherine lay in his arms, she felt the full weight of her deception. This was no longer just an investigation. She was falling for the man she was supposed to destroy. "Tell me something true," Alexander said in the darkness. "What do you mean?" "We both know there are things we're not saying. Tell me one true thing about yourself." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I've been alone for so long and I'd forgotten what it felt like to be held. And being held by you feels like coming home." It was the most honest thing she'd said since arriving in Denver. Alexander pulled her closer. "My true thing, I've built an empire, but until you, I'd never built anything worth keeping." The next morning brought harsh reality. Catherine woke to find Alexander gone, a note saying he had urgent business. She dressed quickly and went to her hidden cache of evidence. She needed to send a report to her editor, but how could she now? She crossed a line personally and professionally. While she wrestled with her conscience, Alexander was meeting with Judge Patterson. We have a problem, the judge said. Someone's been asking questions about the Henderson land deal, a journalist from back east. Who? Don't know yet, but they've been thorough. If they find the right documents, they won't, Alexander said firmly. Double the security at all offices and find out who this journalist is. What if they've already found something? Then we deal with them quietly. Alexander left the meeting troubled. The timing was suspicious. A mysterious journalist appears just weeks after his convenient marriage to a woman who asked too many questions. He thought about Victoria's tears last night, her passion, her confession in the darkness. Either she was the best actress he'd ever met, or maybe both things were true. Maybe she was investigating him and falling for him simultaneously. That evening, he arrived at Victoria's house with flowers and suspicion in equal measure. She greeted him warmly, but he saw the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "We need to talk," they both said simultaneously, then laughed awkwardly. "You first," Alexander said. Catherine took a breath. She should confess everything, warn him about the investigation, give him a chance to explain or defend himself. But looking at the documents she'd found, she knew there was no innocent explanation. "I think your mother is warming to me," she said instead, taking the coward's path. "That's not what you were going to say." "No," she admitted, "but I'm not ready for that conversation." "When will you be ready?" "When you are." They stared at each other, both knowing they were dancing around dangerous truths. "There's a cattle auction tomorrow," Alexander said finally. "Come with me, see what I actually do." "I'd like that." The auction was held at the stockyards, a sprawling complex that showcased Alexander's power. Catherine watched him work, negotiating, commanding respect, making decisions that affected hundreds of livelihoods. She saw how the smaller ranchers deferred to him, some with respect, others with barely concealed fear. During lunch, she overheard a conversation that chilled her. "Thornton's making an offer on my land," one rancher told another. "Don't think it's optional." "Take it," his friend advised. "Remember what happened to Henderson." "Henderson had an accident." "Sure he did. An accident that happened right after he refused to sell." Catherine looked at Alexander across the yard, laughing with some buyers. Was he capable of murder? The documents suggested yes, but the man she'd come to know. That evening, as they returned to town, Alexander noticed her quietness. "The stockyards can be overwhelming," he said. "It's not that. Alexander, what happened to a man named Henderson?" His expression hardened. "Why do you ask?" "I overheard something. People seemed afraid. People fear what they don't understand. Henderson sold his land and moved to California, that's all." But Catherine had seen the death certificate in Alexander's files. Henderson had died in a fire 2 days after refusing to sell. The official cause was an accident, but the timing. "I need to go to the house," she said. "I'm not feeling well." Alexander studied her. "What's wrong, Victoria? And don't say nothing. You've been different all day." This is all moving so fast. Last night, today. I need time to think. About us. About everything." He dropped her at the house, but instead of leaving, he waited. Something was wrong, and his instincts, honed by years of dangerous deals, were screaming warnings. Inside, Catherine was packing. She had enough evidence to write the story to expose Alexander's crimes. But she also knew that once the story broke, he'd know she'd betrayed him. The smart thing was to leave now tonight, before he discovered the truth. She was closing her trunk when the door opened. Alexander stood there, and in his hand were papers. Her real papers, the ones she'd hidden. "Catherine Wells," he read. "Investigative journalist, New York Tribune." His voice was deadly calm. "I had Frederick search your room while we were out. Imagine my surprise." "Alexander, I can explain." Can you explain how you've been lying to me from the moment you stepped off that train, how everything between us has been a lie?" "Not everything," Catherine said desperately. "Last night wasn't a lie. How I feel about you isn't a lie." "How you feel about me?" He laughed bitterly. "You've been gathering evidence to destroy me, and you claim to have feelings for me. Both things can be true." "No, they can't." He threw the papers at her feet. "I trusted you. For the first time in years, I let someone in and you were using me. You're guilty of the things I've investigated. The land fraud, the bribes, Henderson. Henderson was an accident." "Was it really?" Alexander was silent for a moment. "You want the truth. Yes, I've bent laws. Yes, I've forced sales, but I've never killed anyone. Henderson's death was convenient, but it wasn't my doing. The documents show payments to investigate him, to pressure him, not to kill him. Alexander stepped closer. But you'd already decided I was guilty, hadn't you? Before you even met me. The evidence, the evidence shows I'm a ruthless businessman, not a murderer. He grabbed her arms. Do you really think I'm capable of that? After everything we've shared, do you think I could kill an innocent man? Catherine looked into his eyes, searching for truth. I don't know anymore. I don't know anything except that I've made a terrible mess of everything. That's the first honest thing you've said. He released her. You have 1 hour to leave Denver. After that, I can't protect you. Protect me from what? From the men who actually did kill Henderson. The ones who don't like journalists asking questions. His expression was grim. You've been investigating the wrong man, Catherine. I'm guilty of many things, but not murder. The real killers are still out there, and they know who you are now. Catherine stared at Alexander, her journalistic instincts warring with her emotional turmoil. If you're not responsible for Henderson's death, then who is Senator Morrison and his associates? They've been using my land deals as cover for their own activities. When someone refuses to sell to me, I walk away. When someone refuses them, he didn't need to finish. Why didn't you stop them? Because exposing them would expose me too. We're tangled together like snakes. I provide legitimate business cover, they provide political protection. That makes you complicit. Yes, Alexander agreed simply. It does, but there's a difference between complicity and murder. Before Catherine could respond, the sound of horses approaching made them both freeze. Alexander moved to the window, peering through the curtains. Morrison's men, he said quietly. They must have followed me. He turned to Catherine. Do you trust me? I don't know. Wrong answer. Do you want to live? Yes. Then you need to trust me now. He pulled her toward the back door. My carriage is in the alley. We're going to walk out calmly, get in, and drive away. Can you do that? Catherine nodded, her reporter's notebook and evidence tucked into her bodice. They slipped out the back as the front door splintered under the boots of Morrison's men. Alexander drove the carriage himself, taking a circuitous route through Denver's back streets. We need to get you on a train tonight. No, Catherine, this isn't a game. These men will kill you. Then help me expose them. You have inside knowledge, documents they don't know about. Together we could die. He pulled the carriage into an alley behind his mansion. Come inside. We need to plan. His private study was a fortress of locked cabinets and hidden safes. Alexander opened one, pulling out files Catherine hadn't found in her earlier snooping. Everything's here, he said. Morrison's bribes, the murder orders, all of it. I kept it as insurance. Why are you showing me this? Because you were right about one thing. I'm guilty. Maybe not of murder, but of allowing it to happen. Of profiting from fear. He handed her the files. Take these, write your story, but leave Denver tonight. Come with me. The words surprised them both. What? Alexander asked. Come with me. Testify, help me bring them down. You could get immunity if you cooperate. I'd lose everything. You'd keep your life, and maybe your soul. Alexander laughed bitterly. You think I have a soul worth saving? I know you do. I've seen it. When you held me last night, when you laugh at Timothy's jokes at the stockyard, when you defend the smaller ranchers from Morrison's worst impulses. Catherine moved closer. You're not a good man, Alexander, but you're not irredeemable. You're naive. Maybe, or maybe I'm the first person in years to see who you could be instead of who you are. A sound from downstairs interrupted them. Voices, footsteps. They're here, Alexander said. He locked the study door, then opened a hidden panel in the wall. This leads to the stables. Take the files and go. Not without you. Catherine, I'm not leaving you to face them alone. Alexander looked at her. This infuriating woman who'd lied to him, investigated him, and somehow made him want to be better than he was. You're going to get us both killed, he said, but he grabbed his own set of documents and followed her into the passage. They emerged in the stables where Alexander's best horses waited. He saddled too quickly while Catherine changed into riding clothes she found in a trunk, probably left by one of his mother's candidates. Where are we going? She asked as they mounted. There's a federal marshal in Colorado Springs, Judge Harper. He's the only clean law within 100 miles. How do you know he's clean? Because Morrison tried to bribe him and failed. Nearly got him killed for it. They rode hard through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. As dawn broke over the mountains, Catherine saw Alexander differently. Not the polished businessman or the dangerous cattle baron, but a man running from the empire he'd built on sand. "Why are you doing this?" she asked during one rest. "Because you were right. I've been alone so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone believe I could be better." He looked at her, even if that someone was lying to me the entire time. "Not the entire time. When I said being held by you felt like coming home, I meant it. And now, after everything," Catherine considered, "now I think home isn't a place, it's a person who sees all of you, the good, the bad, the terrible, and chooses to stay anyway." "I haven't asked you to stay." "No, but you haven't asked me to leave either." "Not really." They reached Colorado Springs by noon, exhausted and dust-covered. Judge Harper's house was a modest Victorian on a quiet street. The judge himself, a stern man in his 60s, listened to their story with increasing alarm. "You have proof?" he asked. Alexander and Catherine spread the documents on his desk. The judge examined them carefully. "This is enough to hang Morrison and half the territorial government," he said finally. "But you realize what you're risking, Thornton. You'll be finished in Colorado." "I'm finished anyway. At least this way I might sleep at night." "And you, Miss Wells, you understand Morrison has resources everywhere. Publishing this story will make you a target for life. That's what journalism is, Judge. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable." Judge Harper smiled slightly. "Very well. I'll wire the federal authorities in Washington. They've been looking for concrete evidence against Morrison for years. This should do it." He paused. "But you'll both need to testify. Are you prepared for that?" Alexander and Catherine looked at each other. "We are," they said in unison. The judge put them in protective custody at a hotel adjoining rooms with a federal deputy on guard. That evening, as Catherine prepared her story for the Tribune, Alexander knocked on the connecting door. "May I come in?" She let him in, noting how different he looked, disheveled, tired, but somehow younger, as if confession had lifted years from his face. "I need to say something," he began. "What's between us? The lies, the betrayal, all of it. I don't know if we can get past it." "I don't either," Catherine admitted, "but I want to try." He took her hands. "You came here to expose a monster and ended up saving a man. I don't know if that makes you a terrible journalist or an excellent human being. Both, probably." "Catherine, when this is over, when Morrison is arrested and your story is published, what then?" "I don't know. What do you want also?" "I want to start over. Somewhere nobody knows either of us. Build something honest this time." He pulled her closer. "Build it with you if you'll have me." "You're proposing again." "I'm proposing for real this time. No contracts, no time limits, no lies." Catherine thought about the strange path that had brought them here. A fake marriage that became real, an investigation that became a love affair, enemies who became allies. "I came here to destroy you," she said. "And you did. The old me is dead." Alexander cupped her face. "But you also created something new, someone I actually like when I look in the mirror." "That's not my doing. That's yours." "It's ours." She kissed him then, and it was different from before. Not desperate or passionate, but deep and sure, a promise of possibilities. The trial was a sensation. Alexander's testimony, backed by the documents, led to Morrison's arrest along with 6 other officials. Catherine's story ran in newspapers across the country, exposing the land fraud scheme that had stolen millions from honest homesteaders. Alexander lost everything as predicted. His lands were seized, his assets frozen pending investigation. But he stood tall through it all, Catherine beside him in the courtroom. "Any regrets?" she asked him after the verdict. "Only one." "What's that?" "That I didn't meet you before I became someone who needed exposing. If you hadn't become that person, we'd never have met at all." "Then I regret nothing." They left Colorado with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small amount of money Catherine had saved. They went to San Francisco, where nobody knew them, where they could start fresh. Alexander found work at a shipping company using his business acumen for legitimate purposes. Catherine continued journalism, but focused on social reform rather than investigations. They lived in a small apartment above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread replacing the scent of cattle and corruption. 1 year after their fake wedding, they married again, for real this time in a small church with only strangers as witnesses. Catherine wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Alexander had sold his last gold watch to buy her a ring. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the minister asked. "I do." Again. "Forever this time." "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do, despite his many flaws." The minister looked confused but continued the ceremony. That evening in their tiny apartment, they danced to music drifting up from the street. "We could have been rich," Alexander said. "We could have been Myers forever," Catherine countered. "Instead, we're poor and honest." "And happy," Alexander considered. "Yes, surprisingly and possibly happy." "Then we're richer than we ever were in Denver." 5 years later, Alexander had worked his way up to partner in the shipping firm, his business skills proving valuable when applied honestly. Catherine had become a respected journalist, her expose of the Morrison scandal having made her reputation. They had 2 children by then, a boy named James after Alexander's honest father and a girl named Victoria, because Catherine said even our lies led us to truth. One day a letter arrived from Denver. Eleanor Thornton, Alexander's mother, had tracked them down. "My darling son," she wrote, "I know what happened, all of it. I know what you sacrificed and why. I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud too. You chose honor over empire. That's the son I raised, even if it took a fake wife to remind you of it." There was a check enclosed, Eleanor's own money, not from the tainted Thornton fortune. "We can't accept this," Catherine said. "We can and we will. Consider it a wedding gift." 5 years late. They used the money to buy a small house with a garden where their children could play. Nothing grand, nothing like the mansion in Denver, but theirs honestly earned. Years passed. The Morrison scandal became history studied in law schools as an example of corruption exposed. Alexander testified at several more trials, helping to clean up land fraud throughout the West. Catherine wrote books about their experience, about the cost of ambition and the value of truth. On their 10th anniversary, the real one, not the fake one, they returned to Denver. The city had changed, grown. Alexander's former empire had been broken up, sold to legitimate buyers. The mansion was now an orphanage. They stood outside the train station where Catherine had first arrived as Victoria Hamilton, fake bride to a cattle baron. "Would you do it again?" Alexander asked. "Knowing everything, every lie, every truth, every moment," Catherine said, "because it led us here, to Denver, to each other, to ourselves, to the life we built from the ashes of the one we burned down." An elderly woman approached them, Mrs. Patterson, who'd witnessed their first fake wedding. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, I heard you were back. My, you both look well." "It's Mr. and Mrs. Brennan now," Alexander said, using the name they had adopted in San Francisco. "New name, same love," Mrs. Patterson said wisely. "I could see it even then, you know. Even when you were pretending, the truth was there." After she left, Catherine laughed. "Were we that obvious? Apparently love shows even through lies." They visited Judge Harper, now retired, who greeted them warmly. "You two are legends here," he said. "The fake marriage that brought down an empire of corruption." "We prefer to think of it as the real marriage that just started badly," Catherine said. "However it started, you did the right thing. Both of you." That evening, they had dinner at the same restaurant where they'd first dined as supposed newlyweds. The maitre d' recognized them, seating them at the same table. "For old times' sake," he said with a wink. "Those old times nearly got us killed," Alexander reminded Catherine. "But they didn't. We survived. More than survived. We thrived. In spite of ourselves. Or because of ourselves. We were both broken, Alexander. You by ambition, me by righteousness. But broken things can be mended stronger than they were before." Philosophy from a journalist. Wisdom from experience. As they raised their glasses in a toast, Catherine thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. She'd come to Denver to expose a cattle baron's crimes, had married him as a lie, fallen in love with him. Him despite herself, and helped him destroy everything he'd built on corruption. In return, he'd saved her life, chosen truth over fortune, and loved her through betrayal and redemption. To fake marriages that become real, Alexander toasted. To cattle barons who find their souls, Catherine countered. To journalists who save the men they come to destroy. To second chances and new beginnings. To us, they said together and drank, later walking through the Denver streets under stars that didn't care about their complicated history. Alexander pulled Catherine close. I have a confession, he said. Another one I don't think my heart can take more revelations. This one's good. I knew you were investigating me from the second week. Catherine stopped walking. What? Your questions were too specific, too informed. You knew things only someone with inside information would know. Then why didn't you expose me? Because you fascinated me. This beautiful, brilliant woman willing to risk everything for truth. I'd never met anyone like you. So you let me investigate you. I let myself fall in love with you. The investigation was just foreplay. Catherine hit him laughing. You impossible man. You could have saved us both so much trouble. Where's the fun in that? Besides, would you have believed me if I just confessed everything up front? No, she admitted. I had to see for myself who you really were. And who am I really? A good man who lost his way and found it again. My husband. My home. And you, who are you really? A woman who came looking for a story and found a life. Your wife. Your conscience. Your heart. They kissed under the Denver stars, no longer the cattle baron and the fake bride, but simply Alexander and Catherine. Two people who'd found truth in lies, love in deception, and redemption in each other's arms.